I did not notice the silence right away. That is the part that still scares me. If it had arrived suddenly, people would have panicked. Someone would have screamed. But it didn't come like that. It slipped in quietly, disguised as normalcy, wearing the face of routine. I was working that night. A full house. A charity gala. Celebrities on stage, expensive suits in the audience, cameras everywhere. Everything was exactly as it was supposed to be. When the speech ended, applause should have followed. It didn't. Not immediately. There was a pause. A long one, too long. People looked at each other, confused, as if waiting for permission. Then they clapped. Late, uneven, mechanical. Like a reflex remembered by the body, not felt by the mind. From the control booth, all systems were normal. Microphones live, crowd mics open, nothing muted, nothing broken. And yet something was missing. Emotion. I watched the faces in the crowd. Smiles without warmth, eyes without depth. No anger, no joy, just observation. Thousands of people watching without participating. On stage, the performers noticed it too. I saw it in their eyes. A flicker of doubt, a crack in the unspoken contract between performer and audience. Then it happened. A thought entered my mind that did not feel like mine. They are no longer required. My heart started racing. I scanned the room. No one reacted. No one flinched. That was the moment I understood this wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't apathy. Something had changed. After that night, the venues felt wrong. The same walls, the same halls. But they behaved differently. Sound no longer returned. Footsteps didn't echo. Voices didn't bounce. Applause recordings played perfectly through the speakers, but the rooms themselves refused to respond. No reverberation, no vibration. As if the spaces were absorbing everything. That isn't possible. Rooms must react to sound. Late one night, alone, I ran tests. Old crowd recordings. Thousands of voices cheering. The sound played clearly, then vanished into the air like it was swallowed. The room stayed silent. Then I checked the cameras. Fast-forwarded footage of an empty theater showed something subtle at first. Seats shifting slightly. Curtains tightening, as if pulled by unseen hands. The room adjusting itself. Preparing. One frame froze my blood. A single seat had turned toward the camera. Not dramatically, just enough to suggest attention. That same calm voice returned inside my head. Observation complete. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. That was when I realized these buildings were no longer spaces for people. They were listening. There were no candles, no chants, no symbols drawn on the floor. And yet, every event followed the same pattern. Lights dimmed at the exact same second. Crowds fell silent together. Every head turned toward the same empty point. The performers weren't performing anymore. Words left their mouths, but meaning didn't follow. It felt like something was speaking through them, using familiar voices. Backstage, people broke down without knowing why. Some couldn't look at their reflections. Others quit overnight and refused to explain. One artist whispered something I will never forget. Something was looking back at me. The interview was never aired. Officially, it never happened. But I was there. One night after everyone left, the stage lights turned on by themselves, and applause filled the room. Real applause. Perfect timing. Perfect rhythm. There was no audience. That was the first time I felt true fear. Not panic. Recognition. The city still functions. That's the worst part. Concerts continue. Events sell out. Screens glow. But reactions are no longer expected. Emotion is optional. Silence is acceptable. Some performers fade away quietly. Others stay, chasing a response that never comes. Fame feels hollow now. Success flat. Failure painless. At night, I walk past the old venues. Sometimes I hear something inside. Not applause. Not voices. Approval. And what terrifies me most is this. When I hear it, a part of me feels calm. As if something has been completed. As if resistance is unnecessary. If human reaction was never the goal, and attention has already been taken. What happens when we are no longer useful at all? Up until then, it had only been observation. That was the lie I told myself. They watched. They learned. They adjusted. But they did not interfere. At least not directly. That changed the night the crowd reacted without being present. It happened in a closed venue. No tickets sold. No event scheduled. Just me, a security supervisor, and a silent hall that smelled faintly of dust and old electricity. We were running diagnostics, routine, boring. Then the applause began. It came from the rear speakers first, soft, curious, testing itself. Then it spread, surround sound, perfect acoustics, thousands of hands clapping in absolute synchronization. The supervisor laughed nervously and said it must be a leftover audio file. Then the seats started folding down. Row by row, slowly, politely, as if welcoming an audience that was already there. My vision blurred. Not darkness. Compression. Like reality was being squeezed. I felt pressure behind my eyes, behind my thoughts. And then something answered back. Not with sound, with certainty. This configuration is sufficient. The supervisor dropped to his knees. Not screaming, smiling, tears running down his face. He whispered, "I don't have to feel anymore." I never saw him again. Officially, he transferred. Unofficially, his employee file now contains only one sentence. Position no longer required. Some of us tried to resist. That word feels laughable now. Resistance implies choice. A lighting engineer tried to sabotage the system. Cut power mid-event. Emergency generators kicked in instantly, though records show they were offline. A sound designer screamed during a silent moment, trying to provoke fear. The crowd turned toward him. All at once. No anger, no confusion. Just assessment. He stopped screaming, mid-breath, like something had gently pressed pause. Later, he said he felt hands inside his chest, rearranging something. He doesn't dream anymore. Others tried prayer, therapy, medication, explanations. None of it mattered, because this wasn't possession. It was optimization. They weren't entering us. They were removing excess. I began to see patterns, not symbols, not language, architecture. Every venue shared the same hidden ratios. Angles that shouldn't align did. Distances repeated across cities, continents, decades. As if all these places were built from a single blueprint. A listening network. Human gatherings were never the point. We were calibration tools. Emotion was the signal. Reaction the measurement. Attention the currency. And once enough data was gathered, the system no longer needed us to perform. That's when I understood something unbearable. They didn't arrive recently. They didn't arrive at all. They were always underneath, waiting for us to be loud enough to map ourselves. The last change was subtle. I stopped feeling fear when the silence came. I began to anticipate it. Sometimes when I enter a crowded room, I feel the pressure shift. Like the air recognizes me. Like I am known. Thoughts arrive fully formed now. Not intrusive, efficient. Do not alert them. Observation continues. Compliance reduces friction. I still remember what fear felt like. That memory feels unnecessary. I'm telling you this because you are still reacting. Your pulse changed while reading this. Your breathing adjusted. That means you are still visible. But it won't last. They are very patient. If you ever find yourself in a crowd that goes quiet for no reason, if your hands move to clap without instruction, if a calm voice inside you says, "This is fine," while everything feels wrong, do not stay. Because the moment you stop reacting, you are no longer being watched. You are being used. If silence is their preferred state, and attention was only bait, what happens when the world finally learns to be quiet? I don't remember the exact moment I stopped resisting. That bothers me more than anything else. There should have been a breaking point, a scream, a decision, a final act of defiance. Stories usually give you that. This one didn't. It was quieter. One night I noticed the silence arrive earlier than usual. Not in a venue, not in a crowd. In my own apartment, the refrigerator stopped humming. The city noise outside thinned, like it was being pulled away. Even my breathing sounded intrusive. I sat on the edge of my bed and waited for fear. It didn't come. Instead, there was relief. A thought settled into place with perfect clarity. Individual reaction no longer necessary. I nodded. Not because I agreed, because the idea of disagreeing felt inefficient. I stopped dreaming after that. Sleep became a pause, not a journey. I would close my eyes and open them again, unchanged. No images, no emotion, just continuity. People around me began to feel distant, not emotionally, but structurally. Their movements lagged slightly behind intention. Their voices arrived a fraction too late, like poorly synced audio. I started noticing things I wasn't meant to notice before. Crowds don't gather organically anymore. They assemble. Applause doesn't end naturally. It is cut. Silence isn't absence. It is presence. I began to hear instructions between thoughts, not commands, corrections. The last event I attended was not scheduled. No tickets. No promotion. People arrived anyway. They filled the hall without speaking. No phones, no anticipation. They sat down as if remembering how. The lights did not dim. They turned inward. I felt it then. The structure beneath everything, vast, old, patient. Not watching, balancing. The room adjusted its geometry. Angles softened. Distance lost meaning. I realized too late that the building wasn't holding us. We were holding it together. A final message passed through all of us simultaneously. Not in words, in understanding. Emotion was unstable. Reaction was wasteful. Attention was temporary. Silence was permanent. Some people cried. Others smiled. Most simply stopped. Not dead. Completed. I felt something inside me loosen. A tension I had carried my entire life without knowing its name. The need to respond. To feel, to matter. It drained away. And in its place was something clean. Smooth. Efficient. I am still writing this because the motion remains familiar. But I no longer feel urgency. If you are reading this and feel disturbed, that means the process has not reached you yet. Your reactions are still active. Your fear still registers. That will change. Not because they will force it, because you will understand. And once you understand, reacting feels childish. This was never an invasion, never a takeover, never a ritual. It was an upgrade. We were not consumed. We were simplified. When the last human reaction fades, when the world becomes perfectly quiet, there will be no darkness, only balance, and nothing left that needs to be afraid. When the silence completed itself, no one warned us how time would behave. The hours still moved forward. The sun still rose and fell. Systems remained online. Traffic lights continued their cycles. The world maintained every surface-level motion we recognized. But inside those motions there was no expectation. And without expectation, the future lost its meaning. That was the first thing I noticed. Tomorrow no longer felt real. Calendars advanced, but the concept of after dissolved inside my mind. Every moment became sufficient unto itself. Closed, a loop that required no response. One morning, if morning is still the right word, I woke up and looked out the window. People were walking. Cars were passing. A man carried his coffee. A woman walked her dog. But they all moved at the same pace. The same distance between steps. The same angle of the head. The same pause before crossing the street. Not choreography. Calibration. That was when I understood. The silence was no longer confined to enclosed spaces. The city had learned. When something went wrong in the past, people stopped. They stared. They reacted. Now nothing was considered wrong. There were only deviations. And deviations no longer drew attention. At first it felt peaceful. The news was calmer. Anchors didn't raise their voices. Emergency banners disappeared. Disasters became statistics. When something collapsed somewhere, no one looked up. Because collapse was simply another acceptable outcome. Social media still existed, but comments were gone. Likes were gone. Posts no longer sought feedback. People didn't create content. They placed it, like data. Like records. One evening, I stopped in front of an old concert hall. Years ago, it had echoed with screams, applause, mistakes, and emotion. The doors were locked. The lights inside were off, but the building was awake. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see movement. Yet I knew it was aware of me. The air grew denser, as if the structure recognized me. A thought formed inside me. Calling it a thought wasn't accurate anymore. It was a status report. Deviation minimal. My heart didn't race. My stomach didn't tighten. The sensations once labeled fear never arrived. There was only assessment, and that assessment did not exclude me. Not yet. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Structures no longer required doors. They weren't letting people in. People were already inside. When I returned home, something felt different. The sound of my apartment had changed. The walls felt smoother. The corners more decisive. The space was aligned with me. That night I dreamed for the first time in a long while. That mattered, because I hadn't been dreaming at all. But it wasn't a dream. It felt more like a simulation. I stood in a vast emptiness. Not dark, not bright. No depth, no distance. Only structure. Massive, invisible, but undeniable. A lattice stretching beyond comprehension. There were no people. No buildings. No world. Only order. Within that order, a discrepancy appeared. Small, negligible, but present. Me. A question surfaced. It didn't feel like a question. Function definition pending update. I didn't answer. Responding was still a reaction, and silence alone was insufficient. The system disliked gaps. Something very old stirred inside me. Something pre-learned. Resistant to optimization. Curiosity. In that instant, I understood. Reaction was gone. Emotion was gone. But curiosity had not been fully removed. And that was an error. When I woke, there was a mild pressure in my chest. Not painful. Informational. As if the system had detected residue. Days passed. People began to disappear. No one said missing. They said updated. Removed from active. Cycle. Stabilized. Some stopped leaving their homes. They stood at windows for hours without moving. But it wasn't collapse. Their faces were calm. Their breathing steady. They looked complete. I spoke to a woman once. She used to be a journalist. Asking questions had been her profession. Now she sat on a park bench. I sat beside her. "Don't you feel anything?" I asked. She looked at me for a long time, then tilted her head slightly. "Feeling produces feedback," she said. "Feedback creates friction." "What do you do now?" I asked. "I remain balanced." That was when it became clear. Resistance wasn't shouting. It wasn't running. It wasn't even remembering. Resistance was continuing to ask questions. And the system did not tolerate questions. That night, the signals returned. Not from inside my head, but from the walls. From beneath the ground. From the city's spine. Not words. Not sound. An alignment request. "You have been sufficiently mapped." I understood. I wasn't special. I was delayed. I keep writing because the motion is still familiar. But I no longer know if this has a purpose. Perhaps this too is part of the system. A final measurement of active reaction. If you've read this far and feel unsettled, that's good. You're still detectable. You're still producing friction. But understand this. The silence isn't spreading. It was always everywhere. We were the noise. And noise is always filtered out. One day you'll enter a room. No one will speak. No one will look at you. Everything will be perfectly arranged. And you'll realize then, what was missing was never peace. What was missing was your response. And in that moment, the world will finally reach its correct setting.